In today's 2026 watch, I am very excited to finally start interviewing candidates running in Illinois' ninth congressional district. As some of you may know, the list is very expansive with a large, talented, and vibrant field of candidates, and we get to talk about so many issues affecting this community, and I really do hope you will benefit from hearing directly from these candidates. My guest for today's episode is kicking off our series in the ninth district. He has a background working for the FBI. He is a gun violence survivor and a community advocate fighting for folks in the ninth district, hoping to be its next congressman. Joining me today to talk about his race for Congress, the headlines, and a lot more, I am joined by candidate for Congress, Phil Andrew. Phil, thank you so much for joining us here on the Sean S. Show today.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for doing this.
It's great to have you on, and I'm so excited for our discussion today. But before we do, why don't you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to my audience?
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for what you're doing here and helping spread the word. We have a messy democracy, but it really requires participation, and I think that your participation and the audiences that you reach is really critical, particularly now when we're really at this vulnerable and sometimes hopeless place as we think about what the future holds for us. And we do have a role to play in it. And I love the positivity that you bring and really that vibrancy to that, hey, our democracy is important, and there is kind of fun, inclusive ways to be involved, but it really is important too. So I'm Phil Andrew. I'm running for Congress here in the ninth congressional district. I've never been a politician. I'm a public servant. I grew up in this district. My parents did, and I came back to raise my family here. I am running because I'm really worried about the future of our country. I have served in many ways. I was an FBI agent for 21 years, where I fought public corruption and counterterrorism and counterintelligence, and really took seriously my oath to defend and protect the Constitution. I also served on hostage negotiation teams, and I ran and trained people in hostage negotiation. And those values around being able to start difficult conversations in really austere and difficult circumstances, those skills are really things that I've embodied. And then I took them on to PAX Group, my crisis management firm. PAX means peace in Latin. And we bring a lot of those skills around crisis management, conflict resolution, and really bringing best practices to organizations to help them keep safe and thrive in the missions that they pursue. So in many ways, the crisis management, the work that I've done in violence prevention, being a survivor myself, those all really have built upon themselves, and I think call me into this moment of crisis in our nation with this unique skill set, unique vantage point, and a deep, deep desire to serve our country and bring some of those really values around putting my nation before myself, putting my community and its needs, and doing that in ways that I'm not going to profit from, but that I hope will help take on some of these important issues that we're facing. So I'm glad to be with you, and have been looking forward to this discussion.
I really appreciate that. Let's get into things. So I first want to talk about your race in the ninth. It's a pretty vibrant district. A lot of folks live there, a lot of diverse groups. As you go around the district, knocking on doors, going to events, and talking to voters, what are voters in the ninth telling you are their biggest issues and their biggest concerns going on right now?
Yes. Well, I've been out listening a lot. And one of the things that you know about this district is that it's very diverse.
Yeah.
That it starts in North Chicago, in the Uptown area, and it encompasses Rogers Park, Edgewater, Evanston, and then it winds west to Crystal Lake and the northwest suburbs by you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the perspectives the experiences are vastly different. And but the things that are very thematic among almost everybody I talk to is anxiousness, is fear. People are worried about their personal safety. That even though violence is going down in our area and in the city of Chicago, it's still just at an intolerable level. And I think that really gets into people's psyches. And the ambient violence around mass and school violence, targeted violence, political violence, I think that's very much in people's consciousness and they're concerned about it. But I'm also hearing about security, people's sense of insecurity around affordability and the economic chaos. What it means right now to be able to, to work hard and have a fair shot and play by the rules and get ahead. That people have that concern, and they have that concern both in well-resourced areas as well as areas that have been underinvested. That they're both feeling that, even though they're maybe experiencing it at a different level. So what I find as I go around the district is that there's a lot that unifies us, and that people really have some shared concerns. The other thing that I hear a lot is it's just a really fatigue for polarization, for the extremes, for how we keep shouting from one side and then the other. And people really are really not finding any solace or leadership or calmness in that. I think it's only amping their anxiety, and that's what they're expressing to me. They really want somebody that is principled and can bring a high level of integrity to the engagement and listening to take on some of these problems.
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about a lot of that stuff, and there's so much that is going on in the headlines, and we will get to a lot of the headlines in just a moment. I think we could easily do most of the interview in the headlines, but before we head over there, you are running in a very competitive, and as I have described other primaries, vibrant primary. There are, correct me if I'm wrong, 19 of you running in the Democratic primary. I mean, that is a huge number, and it's, I'm sure, always a pretty crowded room when you guys are together. How are you distinguishing yourself from your opponents, and how do you stand out in terms of your vision and what you want to do for the people of the Ninth?
Yes, it is a very crowded primary, and in some ways that's good, right?
Yeah.
That we've got a lot of districts around this country that aren't competitive, that don't see this kind of, as you say, vibrant participation. So I think that's great. I think it's a good sign that the Ninth is interested and hopefully going to be engaged, because I think the Ninth can really lead the nation in really unique and effective ways, and really even guide the Chicago area to a place where it's thinking about how it elevates our entire area economically and with quality of life, and really addressing some of the fundamental things around quality, affordable education, and access to healthcare. But it is crowded, and it's got some unique people. But I was a swimmer growing up, and you always swam in a lane. And
Yeah.
one of the things that has guided me in this is that I have a lane, and that lane has been established by my long service. I am a public servant. I have a servant's heart, and I am guided by and really have almost really do have a sense of a moral obligation to serve others and to do that in ways that elevate them. And I think that is a defining characteristic, that my entire life has been defined by that service, and the places that I've gone and done hard things and built teams to get those things done. The other thing is being a survivor, and really understanding and having worked with people that have experienced some of the worst moments and some of the most tragic circumstances, and building and guiding them to places of healing and safety. That I think that's unique. And finally, bringing a lot of national security and public safety insight into a time where we feel this both risk of violence and the insecurity that comes with lack of clear plan. And I've been in crisis management. I've been a hostage negotiator, and in many ways, I feel like this moment of crisis, almost a hostage taking of our democracy. Now, some of that has been slow burn, right? This administration is symptomatic of things that we have let fester and gone unaddressed for decades. But it's still a crisis, and the actions that this administration have taken, like so abruptly attacking the rule of law and democratic institutions, so almost unlawfully and in some ways corruptly manipulating things, that those little cracks in our public life, those little fissures that exist in our constitutional democracy, and really rupturing those. That has really kind of called me to, and I think distinguishes me as having had experience working on this overseas and domestically with actual corruption, operational experience responding to that, with dealing with crisis and hostage taking, and still being able to build strategies and teamwork and effective solutions where people arrive at a place of safety. And I feel like that very much for our country, that we're at this critical moment that if we don't do the right things and do them well and do them together and effectively, we are in for a really difficult ride. And it could be deep and hard and tragic. And we've already seen the violence. January 6th and what's happening with ICE and these National Guard deployments that are really very disruptive and divisive, and create their own public safety risks instead of solving them.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Illinois has been on the dartboard of this administration since day one, and it's very much permeating throughout the Chicagoland. I mean, my own hometown was just hit by an ICE raid. We are seeing their presence throughout the entire Chicagoland area, but particularly in the 9th District. They're going to places like Wilmette and Winnetka, and among other places that I'm hearing about. I guess, what is your reaction to the presence and really just the communities that have been coming together to say, no, get out of my town?
Yeah. Well, first, that I'm just sorry that this is happening. And I'm sorry to those in our communities that are being affected and being targeted. I'm sorry for the fear and disruption and trauma that it's causing. And what I know as a former FBI agent, as a public safety expert, is that it's unnecessary. That here's what's true, is that we've had an immigration problem for a long time, that we have had opportunities to create clear pathways and a comprehensive system. And we haven't done that because we have a Congress that is so divided, and we have politicians that would much rather keep a problem and try to fundraise on it and try to activate a base on it instead of solve it. And I think that's part of the problem. And then the way this administration is going about trying to address the issue around immigration and not delineating in any way that we can appreciate as authentic the difference between violent migrants that are here illegally, that and don't have a right to be in the country and are committing violence. The difference between the tiny fraction of people that are here under those circumstances from those that have been here for years and have assimilated and are part of our communities and are paying taxes and fulfilling on many important jobs and have
Hmm.
raised their families here. That to do this in such a sloppy, unprofessional, disruptive, and sometimes lawless way is it's trauma inducing, and unfortunately it's intentional. And it's intentional because he wants to create disruption. He wants to create division. He wants to create fear so that people don't participate in our process as robustly as we need them to be. And I really think that it's important for people to understand that it's deliberate, because if you want a public safety strategy that elevates safety in communities, you send people out to coordinate with local police. You recruit people into ICE that don't have criminal histories. You train them to understand very carefully the rule of law, and you teach them tactics that don't create community risk as they conduct their operations. So there's so much wrong with this that it's become an agency that has very little accountability. We've learned a lot about who's been recruited, and it turns out that they have been laxed in their standards, that some of these folks have criminal histories and they didn't wait to vet them out. The
Yeah.
training standards have completely been lifted. They don't even have to do the push-ups. I had to do a minimum standard of physical fitness, and I had to demonstrate that every year that I was at the FBI. They're not being held to that same standard. So I want to make it clear that this is not a professional agency, and is very sloppy, and it's also ideologically motivated. And I think that's probably the most dangerous piece. And it's creating a lot of mistrust, and it's causing damage that we're going to have to take years to bring accountability to, and to rebuild that relationship of trust with communities, particularly migrant communities that are,
Hmm.
are disproportionately affected by violence.
Yeah, there's so much of that trust and that lapse of it. And thank you for noting the fact that standards are suddenly thrown out the window when it comes to hiring these ICE agents. And it's sometimes very evident in those videos that have been going viral of just how lack of a proficiency these people have in some cases, these agents, so called anyway. Um, Communities have been rallying around in support of their community members, including those in the Ninth. I just want to hear really quickly just how you feel when you see people coming together, creating those mutual aid networks, providing food donations, or some creating safe pathways for kids in elementary schools.
Mhm.
Just your thoughts on the community coming together on that.
Well, it is so important that people come together, because those operations are designed to create divide communities and create
Hmm.
fear and isolate people. So anytime people are coming together to do something positive, I think that's great. And I really support those communities and commend them. But I also want to recognize that we've seen this before in our history, that in the 1960s, when we saw unlawful activity, immediately after the civil rights um, movement,
Hmm.
and what it took to do proper civil disobedience and protesting. And I want to remind people of just how hard a work that is. Uh, we've done a lot of work, both at PAX Group and in community violence intervention. Many of the networks that have driven down gun violence in the city of Chicago, which has become a model. Some of our neighborhoods that are using community violence intervention have really driven down gun violence by at rates of as much as 40%. But they
Yeah.
rely on Keynesian nonviolence, like the nonviolence that Martin Luther King um, both advocated for, but also trained in. And that
Hmm.
is super hard work because you have to, yeah, one, you have to really believe and use tactics that are not violent and do not interfere, but do draw attention and resist. And you can't just show up at a protest with those skills. You actually have to train them. And for months, those civil rights workers trained in basements of churches to build the skill, to build the kind of teamwork. And so I really encourage people to embrace that because
Hmm.
you can't just run out and expect to fall back on any skills. Just like these ICE agents, they're not trained, and you see it, and you know it, Ishan. Like you
Yeah,
watch those videos, and what I see is sloppy, dangerous, uncoordinated operations, and it
indeed.
creates a risk to themselves and others. And that's why it's playing out in these ways because they're just doing this very unprofessionally. But when we think about protesting and resistance, I think we need to also recognize that we need to be organized. So what I tell people is one, try to embrace traditional Keynesian nonviolence. And if you don't have it, associate with some of the important organizations like the Institute for Nonviolence or others, or the King Foundation, where you can get those skills. Secondly, it's really important that you stay safe and calm. Third, try to document, view it, and video it safely, and try to narrate the video because what I'm telling you is somebody who has interviewed a lot of witnesses and also tried to make good cases that it's so important to be a good witness, whether it's a bank robbery, a mugging, or witnessing ICE action, particularly when you're seeing something that's unlawful, abusive, or discriminatory, that documenting it is so critical and important. And if you do that in an effective way, it actually can become the evidence that we use to hold accountable these agents that may be involved in unlawful um, or abusive activity. And I feel very strongly that we will have a day where we will be able to bring accountability to this, and it's very important that folks embrace that and recognize their role in this moment.
We could talk about this topic all day. I mean, there is so much to unpack with what is going on, but we do have to move on to a few other topics. But I did want to ask one last question about this. ICE has been working mainly out of the Broadview facility in the Chicagoland area. As I'm sure you've known, we just learned in the past 24 hours, one of your primary opponents, Kat Abu Ghazaleh, who protested at that Broadview facility, has been indicted by the Department of Justice, and in addition to five others, for their participation in protests around that facility. We don't have full details yet. We've been seeing a few clips here and there of Kat. I wanted to get your reaction to the Department of Justice leading with these charges against political adversaries.
Yes. Well, first, that the idea that this would be a priority when we have gun violence, when we have sex trafficking, when we have people that are trafficking drugs and guns, when we have terror threats, when we have mass and targeted and anti-Semitic and hate motivated violence that we need to address, as well as threats from overseas,
Yeah.
that this would be the priority is really disappointing. And it is a sign that this administration has lost sight of the priorities on how to keep communities safe. And I'm not surprised by it because of the way that they've deployed ICE in the first place. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't part of a strategy that was designed to keep communities safe and to make them safer because they're not coordinating with state, other federal authorities, and certainly not coordinating with local authorities who have the best insight into how to keep communities safe. So I'm not surprised by it. I'm very disappointed. And I'm confident that the system will sort this out in a way that's fair, and that justice will triumph here.
Mhm.
Yeah, so in some ways, this going into court, just like the Justice Department indicting the former director of the FBI, James Comey, one
Yes.
of the directors I work with, that sometimes bringing these things to court actually brings them to the light of day.
Hmm.
And I think a lot about what I would want if I was prosecuting a case like this or defending a case like this, and gathering all the information and then learning potentially about the individual bias and the training of those ICE agents, and discovering that and finding that, wow, some of these ICE agents have criminal backgrounds. Some of these ICE agents potentially, and I'm not saying this is true, but
Yeah,
we don't know, some of these ICE agents may have been pardoned rioters on January 6th.
that's true.
The truth is, we don't know. And bringing this into court creates the opportunity for serious lawyers to request that kind of information. And I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful for the American people to see the justice system work and bring some of these additional facts, because you can't go into court and keep wearing a mask. And it brings
Yeah.
down this anonymity, and it escalates the accountability, which I think is an important step. So while it's an abusive practice and it is a misuse of resource, and it's certainly not the priority that the American people want, I do think it's an interesting next step, because that is part of the vanguard, on this bulk that we need to protect, and our court system is one of them. It's slow, but it's meant to be slow because it's meant to be methodical, and that's what I know about what works in our system. Even those people that I was part of indicting and bringing into court, they got a fair trial, that they
Yeah.
had their opportunity to bring their side of the story. And I think that's going to be very important for the American people to see.
I actually like that point that you bring up in this approach because to be honest, I hadn't even thought of it that way. It does bring that great opportunity to bring light to the truth. I mean, as long as our justice system does stay intact, which for right now looks like it. So, I mean, I think this is, you're right, a good opportunity to bring light to the truth. Even in the circumstances that we find ourselves in unfortunate circumstances of the reality we find ourselves in. But let's switch gears here. I want to talk about the government shutdown. It's probably something similar to what we've seen. I don't actually, maybe not, maybe something we haven't seen similar to. I mean, this is now the second longest government shutdown in US history. Who knows? Maybe it ends up, God forbid, becoming one of the longest, or the longest. There is so much concern going around right now. This weekend, I'm not sure exactly when this interview will be posted, but as of this weekend, SNAP benefits are expected to run out. And instead of using the emergency fund that is with the Department of Agriculture, the White House is choosing to play games with the lives of millions of families. How do you how do you feel about all of this that we are expecting, that we are experiencing? And do you think there is a realistic path out of this government shutdown before it starts to severely affect families
Yes,
more than it
well,
already has?
yeah, this is impacting, and it's impacting our vulnerable, yeah, which is very unfortunate. But you know what? When you have hostage takings, when you have violence, it usually does impact the most vulnerable in disproportionate ways. And this is, again, one of the defining things, I think, in this race and in my background, and what I might bring uniquely to Congress, is I have a background in negotiation, and I have negotiated with hostage takers. And this
Yeah.
administration functions very much like a hostage taker. And this debt cap vote is very interesting because it's been framed primarily as, oh, this is kind of about healthcare premiums going up. And I think that, that is a worthy thing for us to be making a stand on. And I think that Democrats nationally are kind of rallying around that. But I also think that there's much, much more at stake at this moment. This is an administration that is not following the rule of law. This is an administration that isn't even using the funds that were granted before this shutdown in ways that Congress has passed by law, that it mandated. This is an administration that's ignoring court orders. It's an administration that has a trade policy and a national security and a public safety strategy that is misaligned with providing for safety on our streets. So when I think of granting more money to an administration that's saying and doing illegal and unlawful and things that are hurting the American people, I wonder if we should be giving it more money. And the analogy here of giving a hostage taker money without them showing any willingness to release or to perform on their obligations. So I think that this is a tight situation. And I as unprecedented as it is to be in this, I think that Democrats and Congress in general, Democrats and Republicans, really need to think very carefully about granting more money to an administration that is not following the law and diminishing the constitutional powers instilled in Congress. And that should be not just Democrats. Republicans should be very concerned about that too, at least the ones that are there and care about the country and the future of the country. I get it that we've got a lot of people in Washington right now who are sort of at the trough and are thinking about how they can benefit as opposed to how they can do the work of the people. But if they do care about the work of the people, they should care deeply about the authority instilled in Congress, specifically constitutionally, and whether that is an important thing to be negotiating to get back right now.
So if you are elected to Congress in 2026 and you're there in 27, you're still going to be dealing with a Trump White House, even if Democrats win control of the House and the Senate in their best case scenario. I mean, the risk of these types of funding battles seems to be more and more likely to persist throughout these next 4 years. So if you were in Congress, even right now or in the future, and you face a situation like this, would you continue to hold the line, or would you be ready to start making compromises with the White House to reopen the government?
Right. Well, I think it's yes, and it's a little of both. I think you don't compromise on fundamental issues that are about the health of our democracy. And I think you do compromise on interests that continue to move us forward. That it is about the art of compromise, but there's some things you cannot compromise on. But clearly articulating those and understanding, listening and collaborating, this is symptomatic of larger problems. The fact that we are sitting in a moment in history where we have a very polarized country, and that the conversations are starting at the extremes instead of recognizing our opportunity to solve big problems and worrying about how we rein in the extreme pieces later. So I think that you've got to do both. You've got to, one, bring an attitude and a vision and skills that allow you to collaborate with others to get things done, and also holding true, having a North Star of where your values are, and you don't get lost despite PAC money, despite our political process, despite gerrymandering, and you don't do the sort of performative things that are all about fundraising, that you actually are focused on getting things done. And I think that is becoming very clear. Even in this race, in the ninth congressional race, the candidates that are very serious about focused on problems and listening to people, and those that are engaged in things that elevate them for fundraising purposes. And the performative politics, I think, are part of the problem. And I think that's why we see the Congress being so inept and even willing to give up some of its constitutional rules and responsibilities.
Well, I guess kind of building on that, if we take a bit of a positive note, this is a question I've been asking a lot of your fellow candidates for Congress here on the show, and I like hearing about it. If you are elected in 2026, you're sitting in the halls of Congress in 27, what would you say is going to be your day one priority, and what would your 100-day agenda be?
Yeah, day one is you need to show up with a team of like-minded folks who I would expect are very service-minded, probably folks, and I take great um, confidence in seeing other candidates around the country who have a similar background, are longtime public servants, who have taken an oath to defend and protect the Constitution and really understand what that means and understand that they're stepping into a very volatile and potentially dangerous situation, with given January 6th and some of the election and political violence that we've seen. One is to arrive there with a team that is very focused on stabilizing our democracy. And then second, in that involves a lot, of accountability, of reinstating our inspector generals within these agencies. It requires actually using the funds that Congress allocates in the proper ways. It requires a lot of oversight, particularly over ICE and Justice and some of these agencies that have lost their way under this administration. So I think, but you get through that, and that's going to take time and a lot of energy and unique insight from people who have worked in government and know how to work with others in government. And then I'd like to hope that we've stabilized in a way that we can address immigration and gun violence and some of these things that really create such a divisive and really a economic disadvantage. It really is a disadvantage for the United States to not recognize how we could be leveraging that positively to grow our economy,
Yeah.
and not recognizing that this unique American experience around gun violence really is a cost to our experience in our classrooms, in our healthcare. So that would be an absolute priority for me after stabilizing the democracy, bringing a level of accountability, and building greater confidence in that the American people would have in our country and in public service.
Well, thank you so much for that vision. I hope that people can take a listen to that and can really take note of those important priorities. And I think building that robust team, I don't think I've heard that one yet. I think that is actually really important. So I'm glad that you bring that up. But Phil, here we are running out of time here for our interview. So before we do wrap up, are there any parting thoughts that you would like to share with my audience?
Well, first, I just thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for being so robustly participating and being a medium that is giving this opportunity to get people engaged. Democracy, it demands participation. And I think we've fallen into these patterns in the last few decades where we've outsourced it to special interests and we've given it to career politicians who really have lost their way. And I think it's time. And I think people recognize that we need something different and we need different people who are going to bring a different perspective at particularly this moment of crisis. And that's my background. I do crisis management. I've worked as a crisis negotiator. I have a crisis management firm. One of my secret skills is building strong, diverse, resilient teams to get hard things done in very austere and difficult circumstances. And I really feel like that puts me in a position to be uniquely qualified for this moment. And I think the Ninth deserves it. And I think the people of the Ninth District would would really excel in trying to lead the nation into a different era of politics where we have higher expectations instead of continue to be disappointed in our public servants.
Bill Andrew, candidate for Congress in Illinois' Ninth District. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Ishan S. Show. We hope to have you back on very soon for a campaign update.
I'd be happy to. Thanks for what you're doing, and I really enjoyed this time with you.
Thank you so much.